we're kind of on this thing. It started with me being mad at folks just taking like the low hanging fruit and being mad about the roster versus me saying, you know what, I think they have to kind of figure out what's going on within the roster because they're not as bad as the 5 game losing streak. And we were also trying to figure out why does a team that keeps talking about toughness or who or what are they talking about in a generally speaking when guys always take the podium after the game and they talk about toughness, like where is that and how does it fit? And I'm just it's been downhill from there. Bruntz, Ravi and I have not been on the same page at all.
Okay.
So I
That's
guess
what's going on.
yeah, I mean, we were talking about like how to get better within this the individual particular roster, right? Can you have guys? Is it feasible, Bruntz, to have guys that have been a certain way, even when Nebraska inherited that or went and got them, or since they've been here or whatever, and expect them to act or do different things as a coach? The easy answer for me was just yes. But Ravi's trying to get me to resign myself to the fact that sometimes that's just how it's going to be.
Interesting.
I know, right? Because
Like, at what point do you say a guy is who he is? That's kind of where
Yeah.
I'm like that, because and DB brought up a good example of Jeff Sims from the football team, right? Is at a certain point you kind of have to pull the plug and just be like, this isn't getting any better. He was a turnover machine at Georgia Tech. That obviously hasn't gotten better at Nebraska. Like, at what point do you just say, hey, this ain't it? And I think we might be there with certain guys on the basketball team.
I don't know though.
Who in particular? I guess that changes my. Who are you thinking?
So I do think he's going to fight me on this, but I do think there's a difference between Mia maybe being who he is versus, let's say, Berke being who he is.
Yes.
What about, before I let you get into specifics, what about Morgan? Would you resign yourself to Morgan being who he is, or would you try to find?
That's not always a bad thing, by the way. Like, what Morgan is could be pretty positive.
Yeah, because I think they should do more of what Morgan already is within what they do.
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead. The floor is yours,
So
MB.
let's go back to Berke and Mia. I mean, it feels like you should be getting, like, Mia. You knew what you were getting. Like, you were getting a guy that was going to be was ideally going to protect the rim, was probably going to give you some dunks, not a ton offensively. And, the thing that I've kind of wondered about, like, you had the injury to Rienk, and I think that's caused, basically they don't have another Rienk, and they don't have a big that they can, run the offense through as reliably as they did with him or even Derek Walker. And I think, you're asking Mia sometimes to do things that I don't know that he's comfortable doing or should be doing. So I don't know. I mean, I think with him, I think you knew what you were getting. I don't think that you were probably going to get a ton different from that. I mean, it felt like a floor and a roof situation being pretty similar in pretty similar spots. Berke, I don't know if it's needing to use him in different situations, if it's a role change or if something can kind of shake things loose there. But that one has surprised me a little bit, and I don't know. I don't know that I'm willing to just say that's who he is. So maybe that's an area of improvement. But I mean, I think across the board, going back to your first kind of branch there, the toughness thing. I mean, it's a, like, the rebounding stuff that bothers me. Like, the number of offensive rebounds that you've allowed during the stretch, that's bothered me. And that to me is always an issue of hustle and toughness and want to and all, whatever cliche you want to say. I mean, I guess I could go along with, well, that's just who these guys are, but I don't think that's the case. I mean, I think there's enough guys on this team that have made winning plays at Nebraska that, you can make that work. And so I don't know. I mean, I think I guess I could go along with both of you a little bit. I mean, I think there's definitely areas on this team where you can improve significantly. And I do wonder if some guys shifting roles or kind of looking at your rotation a little bit differently, if that would help. But, I do think that, you kind of have to find those guys on your roster that you can improve and get more out of, because I'm kind of going both with mom and dad here on both situations. Like, I can see it. I can see your points, and I don't know that either of you is necessarily more right than the other.
So, okay, I want to go back to kind of this toughness thing, and I'm only staying with it because the players keep talking about it, right?
Fred does too.
I was gonna say your coach keeps talking about it. So, eye roll, something, nothing. Now this is like hokey DB coach, right? Where I'm like, hey, don't be the last one off the ground, or sometimes you got to foul a guy hard, or sometimes you can't be the last one off the ground, or if you get knocked over, like sprint back. Or if I'm Juwan Gary and I'm supposed to be a tough guy, like I spend a lot of time out on the perimeter, right? Or if I'm Bryce Miller, wow, I felt like I needed to kind of throw you a bone there, Bruntz. If I'm Bryce, like sometimes it's just getting to the foul line, like willingness to get fouled, or if something is physical, that I'm the first one off the floor. Like if you say to me out loud that I'm a physical, tough-minded defensive team, and then 3 weeks later I don't seem to do anything very physical, or like maybe those are little things where you could really get better within the roster that you have that could pay big dividends. Is body language or willing to do stuff like that too hokey this or this late? It's not even that late. It's still January.
Yeah,
in the Big Ten.
It's not late.
Okay, in the Big Ten Conference. Like, is that?
No, I mean, I think that's you got to find the buttons to push on that, and I think sometimes, I mean, there's probably a flip side to this, but I mean, maybe in my simple mind, like if you've got a veteran team and a team that's kind of been, guys have been through it. I mean, you should kind of expect that those types of things should kind of be there. You know what I mean? Like, you play enough college basketball, you kind of know what that looks like. You're going to have to foul a guy hard. You're going to have to, go to the line. You're going to have to, get on the floor. I mean, I was listening to Fred's post game, and that seems to be what he was pointing at, was like, look, like there's going to be 5 or 6 plays a game where you just kind of need to junkyard dog it a little bit, get on the floor, get a loose ball, grab a rebound, whatever. And, during this stretch, a lot of those types of plays have not been going Nebraska's way. And
I could just see the crowd going crazy at time 2, 3, or 4 if guys just went to the rim with like reckless abandon or stood in and took one. Like, how do you let Claude kind of do what he did last night without giving it back to him? You know what I mean? It's like, and the crowd is built for that.
Yeah, no, it is. And it's also getting to that point a little bit too, where, I mean, you guys know how it is, where you've lost a couple games, the kind of momentum starts going against you a little bit, and you can feel that tension. It's like a collective pucker, right? And I think that's crept in a little bit, and you got to find a way to get through that. I mean, and you're right. I mean, the crowd is the type where you get a Sam Hoiberg hustle play, they're going nuts for that. A guy, dives for something or gets a loose ball and makes a nice pass. I mean, they go crazy for that too. I mean, but you just have to find more of that, and you kind of need some of those plays to also be coming from your dudes.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm at with it. I mean, it's great if a role player is doing it, you kind of need somebody. You need somebody over there to kind of set the tone a little bit, and I think that feels like it's been lacking. Is like who's going to be the one to kind of grab the yoke and start flying this plane now that it's in a tailspin here. And, it's on those two veterans that you were really excited that they were coming back. I mean, I think it's got to start with those two guys.
It's weird because it's a team. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Where, like, if I could bring any guy back from last year, it's not a guy that's going to help him offensively. It would be a guy like Allick, who, I mean, you could hit that guy in the face or he would get bumped. He'd still be the first one back down the court. Like,
he's a guy that drives opponents crazy. But not for any of the, like,
yeah, I don't want points from him. Yeah. I just want a guy that's not going to stand for it. I think this is a team that needs a guy to just show, like, hey, if you said out loud this was our MO, then I'm going to then where is it, right? Like, that's the thing. I want the best example of what you told me we were out loud, and I think for this team, weirdly so, it would be a guy like Allick.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's something to be said for that. And I mean, what you described earlier, I mean, the hustle type plays, those types of just small little game-changing plays.
Or just simply if you say that didn't hurt.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I mean, that
didn't hurt.
You mean like when you get hit in the face and you don't,
Yeah, I don't lay on the ground for 4 minutes, right? You know what I mean? Right. It's like, I'm going to get up. That.
Yeah.
Bruntz, here's my question though, right? Is if you haven't been that guy your whole life,
right? I know. Yep.
What are the chances that you become that guy now, right? Like Sam,
maybe it isn't Mia. Maybe it isn't.
Sam Hoiberg's been that guy his whole life, right? Like that's Sam Hoiberg. Yeah. Josiah Allick's been that guy his whole life. That's just who he is, right? I would venture to say it's more rare to turn a guy from somebody who isn't that into one of those toughness guys than it is to turn a guy like Bryce Williams from a 10-point-a-game scorer to an 18-point-a-game scorer. Like, I think the first one's harder.
I get it. Yeah. I guess that's kind of what I meant earlier was like, when you talk about guys that you want a little bit more out of, I mean, at some point they are what they are. And that's what I said. I think there's pieces of both of your discussions that I think are correct. I mean, I'm not asking you don't need like Bryce to go out and just absolutely like cold cock a guy in the lane. I mean, I don't think that's how he is, but
cold cock.
But I do think you need to, I mean, you need somebody to set the tone over there. And it just feels a little rudderless when things aren't going well. Like, who's your voice? And I think that's what I want a little bit more out of is like, okay, you need one of those two guys to either, get in guys' faces, get a little louder than what they're comfortable being. I mean, I'm sure Bryce seems like a pretty chill guy. Like I'm not, thinking that's kind of what he is, but that's what the team needs. I mean, it just, you need somebody that's a little bit more driving the bus. Because it just when things kind of start going bad and guys kind of start standing around outside the 3-point line late in the game looking for something to happen offensively, I think it's got to be one of those two veterans that are gonna make it happen.
So what's interesting, and this is on the heels of me, obviously excited about baseball and what's going on with Nebraska, but we just saw a couple of different pitchers. One come out of the bullpen, have a historic year as a starter. Another guy that has been there for 2 years that came out of high school as a phenom that had to kind of find his way along and get better as the year went along. And a guy like Christo, like we're talking about something that, and maybe it's the mom and the dad in the argument though, but at what point would we have resigned ourselves to what either of those aforementioned pitchers were to not get the results that we ended up getting out of them? Like, coaches just don't think the way of, well, I mean, that's kind of what it's always been. That's how it's going to be. Like, there's just something about coaches and the small degree of being delusional where you're going to constantly keep trying to get it out of guys, right? That's why Sims took so long to come around on, even though he was turning the ball over at a ridiculous rate.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I mean, and it's, the coaches are around those guys all the time. I mean, I think, you have to assume that, I think coaches are a little less willing to say, like, this is just who a guy is, like you want like every last opportunity for a guy to show what he can do. And if he can kind of take things to a different level. I don't know if there's probably a little bit of ego in there, right? Like I can get this out of him, or I can be the one to pull it out of him if I just do something different. But it's a good question. I mean, I think it's probably a little bit different situation with the baseball stuff, but because I think that was more role stuff. But it's.
I don't know, Bruntz. I mean, guys can show you who they have been versus you thinking, okay, there's something else in there. Let's try this.
Yeah, I can.
I mean, I don't want to talk you into it. I'm just saying, like, I don't know. It's possible.
It is possible, but I think this is kind of where we got into the argument, Bruntz, was yes, it's possible, and we have examples of it being possible. But at what point do you have to play the odds versus playing the exceptions? And I think, this question applies as we go into spring football as well, and you've got too many guys on a roster that you're going to have to cut down some. Like the question I think really comes down to, at what point do you have to pull the plug on a guy? And now football's their hand's going to be forced, right? Because of the roster numbers. But the same question I think applies in basketball when you go, hey, I need to win our next game, right? If you're Fred Hoiberg, you're like, 5 cannot become 6. We got to win the next one. At what point do you maybe pull a plug on a guy, at least in the moment, to say, hey, this guy gives me a better chance to win tomorrow?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's what you have to balance. I mean, sometimes I think sometimes, with when you're this far into the season, in some ways, kind of hoping is also a high percentage play. As sad as that is, I mean, it just continuing to hammer away and push buttons. But
I mean, good thing we didn't think that about Jackson Brockett. I mean, come on, guys.
Baseball's weird. I don't count. I give no credit to midseason or midweek baseball stuff. None at all.
I asked you about the same pitcher, Bruntz. It became an ongoing joke last year. We kept running him out there, and it was like, well, maybe this is the week that he snaps out. I mean, that's just coaching.
Yeah, but at some point, if the guy never snaps out of it, that's on you.
Yeah, but
like you got to eat that at some point.
Sometimes, though, it's like I said, I think sometimes you're the potential that a guy turns it around might sometimes be your most high percentage play in certain situations. So
sure, that's fair.
I know. I mean, I think I don't know. I mean, I don't think Fred's been a. I guess we're talking about Fred because we were bleeding over into Brockett there, but I do think that he's been willing at times to pull the plug. I mean, I think he sees it.
Do you know where this really came from? I was a little upset with pushback last night that he ended up. This is the first time he decided to start Ulis, and of all the things that we're going to pick at, from having roster limitations or being mad at roster construction, I would not have used Ulis last night as the example. I said things like, maybe Morgan needs a couple of touches, or maybe Mia needs to play a little less, or maybe Berkay needs to take a harder foul, or not asked to come out of games. Like, there's little things that you can do within the framework of that roster without having to resign yourself to the fact that it's a bad roster. That's where this whole thing started, Bruntz.
Yeah. Well, and even with the bigs, I mean, I think Morgan's been pretty limited, so that's not helping the options there. But with an ankle thing, so it's I don't know. I mean, I think there are small things you can do. I mean, that's where it kind of becomes a test of coaching, right? Like, how do you push some buttons to maybe get a little bit more out of those guys without throwing in the towel on them?
Hey, which competition do you think reveals itself the quickest? Nebraska and spring ball with football, or Nebraska baseball with that non-con schedule?
Yeah, it's a bear. Like, and you're out of conference weekend. You got Oregon State coming in here for 3, and I mean, yeah, people are going to focus on LSU and Vandy being on the schedule, but I mean that true road trip to Louisiana, like that, they don't mess around down there, and like Nebraska's going to have to really, that's not a series you're just going to go in there and lightly win. So, the one thing I'll say generally is when you're putting together a schedule like that, I think it's a bit of a reflection of what a coaching staff thinks they have pitching wise, because that's typically where you're able to compete or not compete with those types of teams. Is that if you got the arms that you can roll out there, you'll be in those games. So I don't know. It's a veteran team. They've got basically everybody back in the lineup. They've added a couple guys that are going to also be pretty important in that lineup. And I think there's some confidence over there about the pitching depth that they have too. I mean, I guess everybody kind of does this time of year, and then a month from now we'll see where they're actually at. But you don't put a schedule like that together, if you don't feel like you've got the guys to at least go in there and be pretty darn competitive.
Back to spring football, ideal time for the spring teams where you kind of divvy it up and you play ball to kind of put guys through the sifter, through the colander a little bit and see what shakes out?
Yeah, I mean, it's I was counting last night, the roster's down to 132.
Yeah.
Only 27 left.
It's plenty. It's plenty manageable.
So you gotta get some answers there. It's still a roster that's relatively on the young side. So
yeah,
I mean, you're going to have your veterans more involved in spring ball, obviously, because you're going to have to kind of have a lengthy install with Butler and Damon being in charge now. But I mean, it's probably going to feel a little bit similar to spring ball, where you're really getting a good look at those young guys and letting them play and kind of see, like you said, what shakes out. But yeah, I don't know. It's going to be a fascinating spring. I mean, it's especially at a few of those position groups where I just don't. I mean, the defensive backs, I mean, you're not going to carry that many guys into the fall. Like, you're going to have to get some answers there in a hurry, I think.
Yeah, half your 27 might be in that room. That's Michael Bruntz, Husker 24/7. We appreciate the time, as always, Bruntz. We'll talk to you later.
All right. See you. Thanks.
Thanks, MB.